Hello everybody, this again is FIDE Master Dalton Perrine back from chessuniversity.com, and I'm doing another video in the Tactics Time video series here today. In this video series, I'm once again going to be working on solving different tactics trainer positions on chess.com. With each of the positions, I'm going to first of all show you the tactic. I'll give you the chance to pause the video so you can work on solving the problem yourself, and then I'll be explaining my thought process and showing the solution to the puzzle after that. So, without any more waiting, it is time for some tactics here. Let's go ahead, hit the orange start button, and see what we get. Okay, so in this position here, it is White's move right now. Black has just made the move pawn to h6. Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with for White in this position. Okay, so in this position here, again, as always, looking for our forcing moves. I don't see any checks against the king right now, so no checks at this point. Do we have any captures? The only two captures I really see are rook takes d6 and rook takes e5. If we do rook takes d6, it looks like black just takes back. I don't see a follow-up there. If we take again, the queen takes, the queen is defending the knight. Don't see anything special at that point. If we do rook takes knight, well, if we get rid of the knight, that's actually not too bad, because there is some usefulness with getting rid of the knight. If we take the knight and the pawn takes back, this actually opens up the line to the d7 square. We could play rook to d7, pinning the queen. If the d-pawn was gone and the knight, we could do that. So rook takes e5, pawn takes, rook d7 looks good. But what if the queen takes on e5? Rook takes knight, queen takes back. Well, that still opens up the access to the d7 square. The queen could go to d7, checking the king, and also attacking the rook on c8 at the same time. So this one's kind of all about looking for... there's not really a simple explanation I can get for this one. This one's just kind of brute forcing it, looking for the captures, seeing if there's a follow-up move. It's all about looking at one or two extra moves into the future. Just because rook takes e5 looks like, you know, we're sacrificing the exchange for no reason, it does actually end up working out that we're taking advantage of the undefended rook on c8, we're taking advantage of the king's position on g7, having it available to be checked if we go to d7 with the queen, different things like that. So it looks like rook takes e5 is the way to go. The pawn takes back, now we have rook to d7, and the queen is pinned, so the queen can't move away. So we're going to go ahead and capture the queen, and it says that the puzzle is solved here. Okay, let's move on to our next position. It looks like White has just made the move rook to d1. Go ahead and pause the video, see what you can come up with for White here, and we will talk about the answer in a moment or so. Okay, so in this position here, again, forcing moves. I repeat it a lot, but it's always typically going to be one of the key answers to any tactic position. We have one check, which is bishop takes f2, but I think the problem with bishop takes f2 is that the king is going to move away, and then our bishop is defended by the knight, which is attacked and not defended at all. So if we move the knight, we lose the bishop. I guess we could take the bishop on c1, White takes back, and move the bishop back, so that does win one pawn. But I just feel like it's a little bit unnecessarily complicated. That's the only check, though. So let's see if there's a different capture that might be better. Knight takes f2 looks pretty strong because we set up a lot of different discovered checks. This knight can move anywhere and check the king. Knight takes f2 also attacks the rook. So if the rook goes to d2, for example, we can move the knight away and attack the rook with a discovered check. So I think after knight takes f2, the rook has to go to f1. That's the only square it can move to where the knight can't move away and attack it. But we could still do knight takes e4 check, the king moves, maybe take the d5 pawn. I think we just win a bunch of pawns if we take on f2 with the knight. So let's go ahead and do that. Now I believe knight takes e4 does win a pawn. Is there anything better than knight takes e4? We could do knight h3 with a double check, but this isn't really that beneficial. If this was a queen on c5, then we'd have a smothered mate idea. Knight h3 double check, king moves over, queen into g1, rook takes, knight f2 smothered mate. But this is a bishop. Knight h3 double check, king h1. We can't, putting the bishop on g1, White is not a check. White will just take the knight on h3. So knight h3 check, king moves. I don't really see a good follow-up there. Knight d3 check, again, the king moves. I don't see an answer there. So I think we just go ahead and take the pawn. Okay, and it does say this is the answer. So we've picked up 2 pawns in the process. Once the king moves, we could even pick up a 3rd pawn on d5, and we're just picking up a bunch of pawns in this position here. So that's pretty nice. Okay, let's move on to our next position. Okay, looks like black is just captured on f3. It is white's move right now. Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with for white in this position here. Okay, so in this position here, it's white's move. Clearly, our first instinct might be to simply capture back on f3. But I think if we take back on f3, the rook takes... I mean, I think white is still better for sure. If we do rook g7 check, the king goes to f8. I think, though, instead of taking on f3, I'm already looking at simply playing rook g7 check. Again, always looking for checks to start off with. Rook g7 check, the king has to go to h8. And the king actually has nowhere to move to. I'm wondering if there's maybe a way to checkmate in that position. The problem ends up being if I move the rook backwards, trying to set up the checkmate, black can always block on f6, even with the queen. Maybe the queen goes back to f6. I take the queen, the knight takes back, but I'm still down a piece because, remember, black is technically up a queen at the moment. But I still like rook g7 check, king moves. If I do rook f7 check, I don't think that changes too much. Black can just go king g8 and we repeat the idea. But if I do rook g7, king moves, and then take on f3, I'm attacking the knight. And once the queen is off the board, then rook down to like g4 or g6 or something like that offers much better checkmate ideas. So I'm looking at rook g7 check, king h8, pawn takes f3. What if the knight just goes to f6 though? Rook g7 check, king h6, pawn takes f3, knight f6. That's blocking my bishop off, which means my rook is attacked on g7. I'm not seeing the follow-up for white there. I mean, at the very least, I can just take on b7, right? I could just take on b7 and then attack the pinned knight pretty soon after that. That's still going to be winning, but I'm not sure if it's winning enough to make it the answer to the tactic. It's definitely winning, but you can also win just by taking the queen and taking the b7 pawn, so it makes it feel like there's something more direct, but I'm not seeing it. Rook g7 check, king h8. Oops. Rook g7 check, king h8, pawn takes f3. If the rook takes on f3, I can move the rook back to like g6 or something like that. Rook g6, knight blocks, rook takes f6, and I'm up, or a bishop takes f6. I can be up a whole rook in that case. But if they don't take the pawn and just move the knight back to f6, I don't have a way to attack the knight with my rook because rook g6, the pawn takes it. So I guess I could just play rook takes b7 and then rook b6 and attack the pinned knight. Trade off everything and then push my b pawn down the board. I feel like that's the answer. So let's try it out. So rook g7 check was correct. I feel like taking on f3 is the idea. Okay, so it doesn't show knight f6, which is interesting. I feel like knight f6 right here would be a decent attempt at defense. I'm going to go ahead and actually go into the analysis board and see if we can look at knight f6 here. So rook g7, king h8, pawn takes f3. If the knight goes to f6, am I missing something here? No, on the right, I know you can't really see it on the video here, but on the analysis board, it's showing rook takes b7 as being the best move, like I thought. The idea is rook takes b7. We're threatening to play rook b6 and attack the pinned piece. If black tries to give his king some space, we can simply go, for example, I guess rook b6, king g7, take, b6, and he cannot capture, he cannot run down the b pawn there. And that would definitely be winning for white. Okay, I'm kind of surprised it doesn't show us playing out that entire route. Knight f6. Yeah, so you'd have to play, you'd take the pawn, and then try to push your b-pawn, or go trade the knight and then push your b-pawn. Okay, so that I guess we did end up getting the correct idea. Just nice to have the computer confirm it for us. Anyways, so that's it for this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed the tactics here. A couple of tactics based on, of course, forcing moves, but this one is kind of like before you take the queen back, you do the check, which is really important. The reason that, like I said before, taking the queen back at the start is not as good is because the rook can take, you check. The king has the f8 square now. The king doesn't have to step into the discovered checks. Or at the very least, black could also just play knight f6, which is stopping rook g7 as well. Anyways, so that's it for this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I will see you guys around in a future video for chessuniversity.com. Hopefully you guys have a good rest of the day, and I will talk with everybody again in the future.